crucible for this struggle is the COVID wards across the country. It's here that nurses and doctors have to wear level 3 PPE as they help each patient to withstand the horrible challenge of this virus. We went in to meet someone who's come through it.
We had a metal mask that went all over, horrible thing, but it puts forth pure oxygen.
Peter Britton, 84, was in hospital after suffering a stroke. He came down with the coronavirus, and within days, it took him to the brink of death.
You've been here for weeks, Peter, and obviously you're yearning to get home. Was there ever a time when you worried that you might not make it home?
Yes. It's a bit difficult. There was one day when I thought I was dead, or very nearly dying, and one little blonde nurse sat by my side and really pulled me through.
But if Peter was nursed back to health, others could not rally.
This guy here just quietly went away.
In order to film on the ward, we had to be fitted with level 3 masks, tested so that not even the tiniest particle of virus could be inhaled. There's nothing easy about nursing COVID patients. The protective equipment hinders human contact.
Some of the things we've learned is about communication, because we're all in our level 3 PPE, and whereas especially with some of our older patients, we can't use facial expressions or smiles or the things that we would normally do. It is about taking our time with those patients, really reassuring them, making sure they can still feel us smiling even if they can't see us smiling.
And with such high levels of protection needed, it's very hard to allow family visits.
It's driving me and my wife mad. I think the only one who's not suffering is the dog. It's been very, very difficult indeed.
People want that face-to-face contact with their relatives, and whilst they might not be able to have, them coming in to visit, it is about doing all of that kind of reassurance stuff for them as best we can, really.
So you're saying no visits? I mean, not even end of life?
No, we are risk assessing people. If we have a patient that's end of life, we're risk assessing the visitors to come in. But we absolutely understand the need for those relatives to come and see their loved ones when they are end of life. The other thing that we do is make sure when those relatives can't visit, that they're reassured that one of my staff is sat with that patient, so that they know they're not on their own.
How long, Mr. Britton?
The staff are so willing just to sit there and hold that patient's hand and sit there for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours sometimes. And sometimes us as chaplains will come down and sit with the patient for a while as well.
For the hospital chaplain, Peter's recovery is a positive. After weeks in which 41 people in the hospital with the virus died, taxing other patients and staff alike. Presumably when people come in here with this, they're very frightened.
Yes, very often. Being ill can be a very lonely experience. Even when you do have visitors, it can be a very lonely experience.
Yes, Luke. Moving around here, you get to understand that there are different levels of protection and different precautions taken with patients in the various parts of the hospital. But for the staff here, moving between those patients involves a mind-boggling series of different protective arrangements and constant changes of their protective equipment.
So what you want to try and do, this foot, pinch the outside.
So that it inverts, yeah.
Yeah.
Leaving the red zone requires an elaborate ritual of doffing and disinfection.
Again in a second.
So now a bit of shimmying.
We used standard hospital PPE and gave them ours.
Then
Ward matron Helen Benfield explained how they get through so much of it each day.
How many times a day do you think you do this, Helen?
This is, you're probably looking at least 4 to 5 times a day, every day. So you can be in your PPE this level for about 4 hours. Most of our staff will be about 2.5 hours because you're just too hot otherwise, you're too hot.
But there is hope here now, not just in the fine-tuning of this care or discharge of many patients, but in the fact that the direr contingency planning has not been necessary.
I don't think anybody knew what the future held. Certainly was concerned about my staff welfare because obviously looking after a lot of people dying is a pressure for them as well as obviously the patients. I was very pleased that we haven't reached that capacity, but it does feel that we prepared as much as we possibly could to deal with that if it came.
We made our way up to the intensive care unit. Many expected this to be the most hard-pressed part of the hospital. But the clinicians here, as elsewhere, have learned the value of new treatments, including the CPAP mask Peter Britton used, that get more oxygen into the lungs without having to come here.
What has been found, I think particularly in Italy, and we've learned from that in this country, is that there is a group of patients where it's possible to sit tight for a while and give people the opportunity to prove that they don't need ventilating. And that's where the CPAP, the tight-fitting face masks and the pressure applied through that has been very effective in helping a significant number of people avoid intubation and ventilation.
In the storeroom, there are ventilators in reserve. And in recent weeks, the team have only rarely had to use the operating theatres they've turned into extra ICU bays. But other aspects of COVID-19 have proven unexpectedly worrying.
The lungs certainly dominate the clinical picture, there's no doubt about that, but we've seen a few people with acute kidney failure, which is well described elsewhere, and that presents a management challenge for us. A lot of the focus about preparing for this on a national scale has been about the availability of ventilators for treating respiratory illness, but something that is becoming increasingly apparent is some of the challenges about accessing machinery and consumables for treating people with renal failure. That hasn't been a problem for us so far, but it's certainly something we're thinking about and trying to prepare for at the moment.
There's an innate reluctance here to say they're over the worst of this crisis, but they're concerned about people with serious illnesses other than COVID who are worried about coming in. They can't also forget that waiting lists for routine operations postponed will continue to grow. And so they are thinking about how they put the hospital back onto a more normal footing.
With the intensive care unit operating only a little above its pre-COVID patient numbers, the senior doctors have started to ready their operating theatres for a return to that role.
So over the last few days we've started having those conversations in a much more active and practical way, actually starting to put in firm arrangements to start reopening things in the next, probably realistically 2 to 3 weeks. There needs to be a time lag because some of the people we want to get in soon, we want to be sure that they've properly isolated at home before coming in. But the caveat to that is we don't know what's just around the corner still with respect to the COVID in our community.
The cleaners come around hourly in some parts of the hospital. In the struggle against a viral pandemic, there's no room for complacency.
We know that it's still going on, and I think if we were too optimistic, people wouldn't stay in lockdown, and that's what we need people to do, is stay at home, take this seriously, stay there, so that actually we don't get that rise.
But for Peter Britton at least, the ordeal is over. During weeks in hospital, his mind turned again and again to going home.
What is it that you're really looking forward to doing when you get home?
Yes, a big hug. Yes, it's the greeting. It's going to be great.
Well, yesterday morning, Peter was discharged, and for good measure, clapped out of the COVID ward by those who'd saved his life. That success will fuel them in the weeks ahead, as the hospital tries to find a new balance between the demands of this virus and the wider health of the community.
Thank you, everyone.